"You're my man now," said the Apache woman, after the lonely rancher saved her from the wolves. Ethan Harper had always lived a quiet life. His ranch sat on the edge of a wide-open valley in Arizona, where the wind whispered through the tall grasses and the sun painted the land gold every morning. The mountains in the distance were always his silent companions, their jagged peaks standing tall against the endless sky. For Ethan, this solitude was comforting. It gave him time to think, to work with his hands, and to live in a way that felt honest and simple. Yet underneath his calm exterior, there was a deep loneliness that never quite left him. He had lost his family many years ago. A sudden illness had taken them both, leaving him with nothing but memories and a sprawling ranch that seemed far too big for just one person. Some days he would sit on the porch of his small cabin and watch the sun rise over the hills, listening to the soft sounds of nature, the birds singing, the wind rustling through the trees, the occasional call of a coyote in the distance. All of it reminded him that life still went on, even if he felt stuck in his own grief. Ethan was used to doing everything himself. He fed the cattle before sunrise, checked the fences that stretched for miles, and made sure the horses were healthy and strong. There was a rhythm to his work, and it kept him grounded. But there were nights when the silence of the ranch felt heavier than the mountains themselves. He would walk through the empty barn, his boots echoing against the wooden floor, and sometimes he would speak aloud, as if someone were there to listen. "Morning, old friend," he'd say to the horse that always seemed to watch him with quiet understanding. And in those small moments, the loneliness would soften just a little. Despite living far from town, Ethan was not entirely isolated. He knew the neighboring ranchers and would sometimes trade supplies or help with chores when needed. Still, he preferred the peace of his own land. The world beyond his ranch often felt noisy and complicated. Out here, life was simple. Work hard, take care of the animals, and respect the land. The quiet suited him. It allowed him to feel connected to something larger than himself. The endless sky, the changing seasons, the pulse of life in the valley. One crisp winter morning, Ethan noticed something unusual. The snow had fallen heavier than usual overnight, and the tracks in the soft white layer told a story he couldn't ignore. Footprints, some small and delicate, some much larger, led from the edge of the forest toward the valley. His brow furrowed as he studied them. Wolves, maybe, or someone lost. His instincts told him to investigate, even though venturing into the woods alone could be dangerous. By mid-morning, he had saddled his horse and followed the tracks. The forest was thick and quiet, the snow muffling his every step. He could see the broken branches and disturbed brush where something, or someone, had passed. His heart began to beat faster, a mix of worry and determination driving him forward. Ethan had spent enough time in the wilderness to know that survival often depended on quick thinking and steady nerves, and something told him that today his skills would be tested in ways he hadn't expected. As he moved deeper into the forest, the wind picked up, carrying a sharp chill that cut through his coat. Suddenly, a sound reached his ears, a sharp, desperate cry that made him stop in his tracks. It was human, and it was close. His eyes scanned the trees, searching for the source, and then he saw her. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with dark hair that fell in tangled waves over her shoulders. Her clothing was torn and dusted with snow, and she looked exhausted and frightened. A pack of wolves circled nearby, their eyes glinting and teeth bared. Ethan's heart sank. He had faced wolves before, but never had he seen a human in such immediate danger. Without thinking, he urged his horse forward, shouting and waving his arms. The wolves hesitated, growling but not yet attacking. Ethan jumped down from his horse and grabbed a heavy branch from the ground. He swung it with force, scaring some of the wolves away while keeping the others at bay. The young woman struggled to her feet, too scared to move on her own. Ethan called out to her, his voice firm but calm. "Stay behind me. Don't move." The wolves were relentless, circling closer as snow fell around them. Ethan's mind raced. He knew he had to act fast. He kicked at one of the wolves, which yelped and retreated, then swung the branch again, forcing the others back into the shadows. Slowly, carefully, he led the woman away from the pack toward a small clearing where the trees offered a bit of cover. Her breathing was fast and ragged, and she clutched her arm, which had a scratch from a wolf's claw. "Can you walk?" Ethan asked, keeping his eyes on the shadows of the forest. I think so," she whispered, her voice trembling. He extended his hand to her, and after a moment of hesitation, she took it. Together they moved quickly but cautiously through the snow, the sound of the wolves fading behind them. When they finally reached the edge of the forest, Ethan felt a rush of relief. The danger was not completely gone, but the immediate threat had passed. Once they were safely back at the ranch, he helped her inside the cabin, where a small fire burned in the hearth. The warmth of the room was a stark contrast to the freezing cold outside. Ethan handed her a blanket and offered her a cup of warm water. She accepted it with shaky hands, sipping slowly while her eyes remained wide with fear and awe. Who are you?" Ethan asked gently. "My name is Naeli," she said, her voice soft. I got lost in the forest. The wolves." She trailed off, shivering. Ethan nodded, understanding more than she could say. He had lived through the harshness of the land, seen the dangers it held, and knew how easy it was to get caught unprepared. "You're safe now," he assured her. "You can rest here as long as you need." Over the next few hours, he tended to her minor injuries, using clean water and herbs he kept for his own wounds. She watched him with a mix of gratitude and curiosity, noticing the care and precision in his movements. Ethan, for his part, felt a strange warmth he hadn't experienced in years. There was something in her eyes, a quiet strength, a spark of life, that reminded him of what it meant to connect with another human being. As the evening settled over the ranch, Ethan and Naeli sat near the fire, sharing the silence and letting the tension of the day fade. Outside, the wind howled over the valley, but inside, the warmth of the cabin made the world feel safe. They didn't speak much at first, but the simple act of sitting together, two strangers brought together by circumstance, was enough to begin a bond neither of them had expected. Ethan knew that his life had been predictable and lonely for far too long. Yet as he watched Naeli rest on the blanket by the fire, he felt a flicker of something new. Hope, perhaps, or the faint beginnings of trust. The ranch, once a place of quiet solitude, now felt alive in a different way. The sound of her breathing, the subtle gestures of her hands as she adjusted the blanket, all reminded him that life could still surprise him, even in the most unexpected moments. That night, as Ethan lay in his bed, he thought about the day's events and what they might mean. The forest had been dangerous, but it had also brought someone new into his life, someone who had faced fear and survived, someone whose presence challenged the walls he had built around his heart. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that the world had suddenly become a little less lonely, and that perhaps, just perhaps, he was ready for a change. And for the first time in many years, Ethan Harper went to sleep with a sense of anticipation, wondering what tomorrow might bring, and whether fate had a larger plan for the lonely rancher and the mysterious young woman he had saved from the wolves. The morning after the terrifying night in the forest, Ethan woke before the sun, as he always did. The ranch was quiet, blanketed in the soft hush of fresh snow, and the wind whispered gently across the open fields. But something was different this morning. Nayeli, the young woman he had rescued from the wolves, was still asleep by the fire. Her face, partly illuminated by the early light, showed a peacefulness Ethan had not expected after such a harrowing night. He moved quietly, not wanting to wake her. The chores of the ranch would not wait, though. The horses needed feeding, the cattle had to be checked, and the fences required inspection, especially after the heavy snowfall. Yet every step he took reminded him of her presence in the cabin. The loneliness that had been part of his life for so long felt softened now, almost as if her quiet breathing had filled the space he did not know existed. After finishing the morning tasks, he returned to the cabin with a small basket of food. Nayeli was sitting up now, wrapped in a thick blanket, her dark hair still damp from snow and her pale skin flushed from the cold. She looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and gratitude. "Good morning," Ethan said, placing the basket on the small table. "You need to eat something. You didn't get much sleep last night." Nayeli nodded. "Ah, thank you. I didn't know anyone would come help me." Her voice was soft, yet it carried a strength that caught Ethan off guard. She had survived wolves in the forest, and now here she was, facing the strange world of his ranch with courage.
"You're safe here," he said. "That's what matters." They ate in silence for a few minutes, the warmth from the fire filling the small cabin.
Ethan noticed how she watched the flames dance, almost as if she was remembering something far away. He wondered about her past, about the life she had led before the wolves chased her into danger. Yet, he did not ask immediately. Some stories, he knew, revealed themselves in time. After breakfast, Ethan helped her to her feet. He suggested she come with him to check on the animals. Nayeli hesitated at first, glancing toward the forest as if wary of leaving the safety of the cabin. But finally, she agreed. Ethan handed her a thick coat and a pair of worn gloves. "It's cold, but the sun will rise soon. You'll see the land is beautiful this time of year." As they stepped outside, the snow crunched under their boots. The cold air was sharp, but it made Nayeli breathe more deeply, as if she had been holding her breath since the forest attack. Ethan led her to the barn, showing her the horses and explaining how to check them for signs of illness or injury. Nayeli listened carefully, her dark eyes shining with interest. She reached out to stroke a horse's mane, her hands gentle, revealing a familiarity with animals that Ethan did not expect. "You've worked with animals before," he observed. I know a little," she admitted. "Where I come from, we always learn to take care of them." Ethan smiled. There was a wisdom in her voice, a calm understanding of life that reminded him of his own lessons learned through years on the ranch. He taught her to feed the cattle, mend broken fences, and prepare firewood for the coming nights. In return, she shared knowledge of herbs and natural remedies, showing him how to make simple poultices for cuts or bruises, and pointing out plants that could soothe minor pain or fever. As the day wore on, they worked together, each learning from the other. Ethan found himself talking more than he had in years, explaining why he preferred the quiet of the land to the chaos of town, and sharing stories of the family he had lost. Nayeli, in turn, told him about her own life in the Apache community, careful to leave out details that might put her at risk, but enough to reveal the strength and resilience that had brought her through the wolves' attack. By midday, the sun had risen fully, casting a warm glow over the ranch. They paused for a break, sitting on a fallen log near the edge of the property. Nayeli wrapped her arms around her knees, shivering slightly despite the sunlight. Ethan offered her some warm tea he had brewed over a small stove, and she accepted it gratefully.
"You're very brave," Ethan said quietly, watching her sip the tea. "Not many people could survive what you went through last night." Nayeli looked down at her hands, twisting the cup gently.
"I didn't have a choice," she said softly. "I I just did what I had to. Ethan nodded, understanding. Bravery, he knew, was not always a choice. Sometimes it was simply surviving, facing fear, and continuing despite it. You're stronger than you realize, he said. The afternoon brought more work. They repaired a section of the fence damaged by falling branches during the storm. Ethan showed her how to hammer posts and stretch wire carefully. Nayeli's hands were nimble, and she learned quickly, surprising him with her skill. They laughed when a post fell over, or a hammer slipped, and the sound of their shared amusement echoed across the snow-covered land. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a sense of companionship that was neither rushed nor forced. It simply existed, growing naturally with each shared task. As the sky began to shift to soft shades of orange and pink, Ethan led Nayeli to the pasture to check on the cattle. The animals were grazing peacefully, their breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Nayeli knelt beside a small calf, her hands moving over its coat with gentle care. Ethan watched her, feeling a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in years. You have a way with them, he said quietly. Nayeli smiled faintly. Animals understand kindness, she replied. People, sometimes they forget. Her words lingered in Ethan's mind as they walked back toward the cabin. The light was fading, and the first stars began to twinkle in the deep blue sky. The ranch, once a lonely expanse of snow and silence, now felt alive with their shared presence. Even the wind seemed less harsh, as if acknowledging the bond that was forming between them. Back inside the cabin, Ethan prepared a simple dinner of stew and bread. Nayeli helped quietly, chopping vegetables and stirring the pot under his watchful eye. They talked about small things, the weather, the animals, the changes in the seasons. These ordinary conversations carried a comforting rhythm, and by the time they ate, the tension from the morning's dangers had faded. After dinner, they sat by the fire again. Nayeli's injuries were healing, and her shivering had mostly stopped. Ethan handed her another blanket, and she accepted it with a quiet nod. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the crackle of the fire and the occasional howl of a distant coyote.
You saved my life, Nayeli said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper.
I don't know how to thank you. Ethan shook his head. You don't need to thank me. You were brave, and you survived. That's enough. She looked at him then, her dark eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his chest tighten. There was gratitude there, yes, but also something deeper, a trust, a recognition that their lives had become intertwined in a way neither could ignore. The night grew late, and Ethan prepared a small bed for Nayeli near the fire. She lay down, wrapped in blankets, and drifted into a peaceful sleep. Ethan watched her for a moment, feeling a mix of relief and curiosity about what the coming days might bring. The world outside was cold and harsh, but inside the cabin, warmth and safety existed. And more than that, a connection was forming between them. One built not on words alone, but on shared experiences, courage, and quiet understanding. As he lay in his own bed that night, Ethan thought about the unexpected turn his life had taken. He had been alone for so long, believing that solitude was all the world could offer him. Yet now, here was Nayeli, a stranger brought into his life by fate, teaching him that survival was not just about facing danger. It was also about opening one's heart to trust, kindness, and companionship. Outside, the wind howled over the ranch, carrying the scent of pine and snow. Inside, the cabin was warm, filled with the quiet rhythm of two hearts beginning to understand each other. Ethan Harper, the lonely rancher, felt a small flicker of hope, a hope that the future, though uncertain, might hold more than just survival. It might hold connection, friendship, and perhaps something even more profound. And as the stars shone above the quiet valley, he allowed himself to imagine a world where he was no longer alone, where the land, the animals, and this remarkable young woman shared his days. It was a thought that brought a faint smile to his face as he closed his eyes, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. Days passed on the ranch, and life began to settle into a quiet rhythm, though it was no longer the solitary routine Ethan had grown used to. Nayeli was recovering quickly. Her scratches and bruises were healing, and her strength returned with each passing day. The snow had started to melt in patches under the warm sun, revealing the dry grass beneath. The ranch, once so empty and silent, now had the faint sound of another presence, footsteps, laughter, and the soft hum of conversation. Ethan and Nayeli continued their work together, tending to the animals, mending fences, and checking the fields. Their movements became synchronized, almost instinctively. Ethan found that he no longer felt the loneliness that had weighed on him for years. He watched Nayeli handle the animals with patience and skill, and he admired her courage and resourcefulness. She in turn observed Ethan's careful attention to the land and his quiet dedication, and she began to understand why he had chosen this life of isolation. One morning, Ethan noticed Nayeli lingering near the barn, her eyes scanning the horizon. "What are you thinking about?" he asked gently. "I'm thinking about my home," she replied, her voice soft. "I was traveling through the forest when the wolves attacked."
I didn't make it back to my village.
Ethan nodded. He understood the longing for home, even if he had no one left to return to. "You can stay here as long as you need," he said.
The ranch is safe. You won't have to face anything alone.
Nayeli's gaze softened, and for a moment a small smile appeared on her face. "Thank you," she whispered. It was a simple word, but in it lay gratitude, relief, and the beginning of trust. As the days turned into weeks, their bond grew stronger. They shared stories of their pasts, Ethan of the family he had lost, and the quiet years of solitude, Nayeli of her village and the lessons she had learned from her elders about survival, respect, and the land. Through these stories they found understanding in each other. Ethan realized that she was not just a survivor of the wolves. She was strong, intelligent, and resilient. Nayeli saw that Ethan was not just a solitary rancher. He was kind, dependable, and willing to risk himself for others. One afternoon, while working in the fields, they encountered a challenge neither had anticipated. A section of fence near the northern pasture had collapsed under the weight of snow, and several cows had wandered close to the forest. Ethan's heart raced. Wolves were known to linger near the trees, and the thought of another attack made him tense. "Stay close to me," he said to Nayeli. "We need to bring them back before nightfall." Nayeli nodded, her eyes steady. Together they worked to guide the cows back toward safety. Ethan shouted and waved his arms to keep the animals moving in the right direction, while Nayeli used a calm, commanding voice to encourage the more stubborn cows. They moved like a single unit, their trust in each other evident in every gesture. When the last cow was safely back in the pen, Ethan let out a long sigh of relief. "That could have gone badly," he admitted, wiping sweat from his brow. Nayeli smiled faintly.
"We did it," she said, "together." The evening brought another kind of challenge.
News of Nayeli's presence reached the neighboring ranchers, and not all of them were welcoming. Some whispered about the dangers of outsiders, and one or two expressed concern that she might cause trouble. Ethan felt a mixture of frustration and protectiveness. Nayeli had done nothing wrong. She had simply survived. And yet he knew that people's fear often outweighed reason. He walked with Nayeli to the edge of the property that night, under a sky full of stars. People may talk, he said, "but we know the truth. You're safe here, and that's what matters." Nayeli leaned slightly on his shoulder. "I don't want to cause trouble," she said softly. "You won't," he reassured her. "As long as we're careful, we'll be fine." Despite the outside tension, life on the ranch continued. The days were filled with hard work, but the evenings offered quiet moments by the fire. They shared meals, stories, and laughter. Ethan found himself looking forward to Nayeli's presence in a way he had never expected. Her voice, her laughter, the way she moved with confidence and care, all of it became a part of the rhythm of his life. One afternoon, while repairing the roof of the barn, Ethan slipped on a patch of ice. He fell hard, twisting his ankle, and a sharp pain shot up his leg. Nayeli was nearby and rushed to his side. Without hesitation, she helped him up and guided him back to the cabin. "Sit," she instructed, her voice firm but gentle. She fetched water and cleaned the scrape he had received during the fall. She wrapped his ankle carefully, showing a skill he had not expected. "You need to rest," she said. "You can't take care of the ranch if you hurt yourself." Ethan looked at her, a mixture of gratitude and surprise in his eyes. "You're good at this," he admitted. Nayeli smiled faintly. "I've had to learn," she said simply. "Life doesn't give you second chances." That night, as Ethan lay in bed with his ankle elevated, he reflected on the changes that had come to his life since Nayeli arrived. He was no longer alone in the way he had once been. There was someone to share the burden of the ranch, someone who understood the land and respected it, someone whose presence brought warmth to the coldest moments. Nayeli, too, found herself adjusting to life on the ranch. She learned the routines of the animals, the schedules of feeding and maintenance, and even the small joys of simple tasks like mending fences or gathering firewood. She discovered that Ethan was patient and kind, and that he never demanded more than she could give. In turn, she offered knowledge, companionship, and courage. Together, they faced the challenges of the land with resilience and determination. One evening, a heavy storm rolled in from the mountains. The wind howled and snow began to fall in thick, blinding sheets. Ethan and Nayeli worked together to secure the animals, bringing them into the barns and checking the fences repeatedly. The storm raged through the night, but their combined effort kept the ranch safe. When they finally returned to the cabin, exhausted and covered in snow, they collapsed near the fire, laughing despite their fatigue. "You know," Ethan said, "we make a good team." Nayeli smiled, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "We do," she agreed. "Better than I thought we would." In the quiet that followed, they shared stories of their lives before the ranch, the hardships, the fears, the moments of joy. They discovered similarities in their resilience, their respect for the land, and their desire to survive and thrive despite the odds. The more they shared, the more they realized that their connection was not just born from necessity, but from genuine understanding and admiration. As the weeks passed, the bond between Ethan and Nayeli deepened. They learned to anticipate each other's actions, to rely on one another, and to communicate without words when necessary. The ranch, which had once been a place of isolation and silence, was now alive with energy, laughter, and shared purpose. One day, as they worked side by side in the fields, Ethan paused and looked at Nayeli. The sunlight glinted off her dark hair, and the wind carried the faint scent of pine from the forest. He realized that he no longer felt the weight of his past loneliness. Nayeli had brought life back into his days, teaching him that connection, trust, and shared effort were as vital as any work on the land. "You've changed my life," he said quietly, almost to himself. Nayeli looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise and warmth. "And you've changed mine," she replied. "I never thought I would find safety and friendship in a place like this. Ethan smiled, feeling a warmth he had not felt in years. The ranch, the animals, the land, all of it had become more than just work. It had become a place of hope, a place where trust and courage could grow, and where two people, brought together by chance and danger, could find companionship and respect. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ethan and Nayeli stood side by side, watching the animals return to the barn. They felt a quiet pride in what they had accomplished together, and a deep sense of trust in one another. Life on the ranch would not always be easy. There would be storms, challenges, and the judgment of others. But Ethan and Nayeli knew that as long as they faced these trials together, they could endure anything. Their bond was no longer just about survival. It was about understanding, respect, and the quiet power of shared experience. And as the stars began to twinkle above the quiet valley, they returned to the cabin, side by side, ready to face whatever the next day might bring, confident in the knowledge that together they were stronger than any challenge the world could present. The days grew warmer as winter slowly receded, and the valley around Ethan's ranch began to show signs of new life. Small shoots of grass pushed through the melting snow, and the trees along the forest's edge started to bud. The animals seemed more energetic, and even the air carried a faint, sweet scent of the changing season. For Ethan and Nayeli, life felt steady, almost peaceful, yet there was an undercurrent of tension neither could ignore. Word had begun to spread about Nayeli's presence on the ranch. Not everyone in the neighboring settlements viewed her kindly. Some ranchers whispered about outsiders and the dangers they might bring. Ethan had grown accustomed to solitude, and he knew how to handle the quiet judgment of his neighbors. But now his concern extended to Nayeli. She had survived the forest and the wolves, but he worried about the reactions of people who might not understand or accept her. One afternoon, as Ethan repaired a section of fence near the northern pasture, he noticed two men approaching on horseback. Their faces were stern, their expressions wary. Ethan straightened and wiped his hands on his coat, preparing for a conversation he had hoped to avoid. "Afternoon, Harper," one of the men called. "We hear you've taken in a stranger." Ethan nodded, keeping his voice calm. "Her name is Nayeli. She's safe here, and she hasn't done anyone any harm." The man frowned. "People are talking. They say she's from the Apache tribe. Some around here don't trust her kind. You need to be careful." Ethan felt a surge of protectiveness. "She's not here to cause trouble. She was lost, and I helped her. That's all there is to it." The men exchanged glances, but said no more. They rode away slowly, leaving Ethan with a lingering sense of unease. He turned to Nayeli, who had been watching from a distance. Her dark eyes held a mixture of worry and quiet understanding. "It's not safe to let people stir trouble," Ethan said, his voice low. "Some of the neighbors won't understand." Nayeli nodded. "I know," she said softly, "but I will not cause harm. I only want to survive, like you helped me." Ethan reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll be careful, together." The tension of that day stayed with them, but they carried on with their work. They mended fences, fed the animals, and checked the fields, each movement a reminder that life went on despite outside judgments. Yet the whispers and wary glances from the neighboring ranchers made them realize that their peaceful life could be threatened at any moment. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Ethan and Nayeli sat near the fire in the cabin. Nayeli was quietly mending her clothes while Ethan sharpened tools for the next day's work. The silence between them was comfortable, yet Ethan could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on his chest. "Nayeli," he began, I need to ask you something. If people come here and try to make trouble, if they don't accept you..."
Are you willing to leave? I don't want anyone to get hurt.
Nayeli looked up, her dark eyes steady. "I cannot go back to the forest alone," she said firmly. "I trust you, Ethan, and I will stay if you want me to. I will face whatever comes with you." Ethan felt a mixture of relief and admiration. Her courage was inspiring, yet he knew that the world outside the ranch could be harsh and unforgiving. He had lived through loneliness and hardship, but he had never faced judgment from others in quite this way. He realized that protecting Nayeli would require not just strength, but careful thought and patience. The following days brought more challenges. A section of the valley near the river had become muddy from the melting snow, and some of the cattle had wandered too close to the forest. Ethan and Nayeli worked tirelessly to guide them back, using ropes and gentle voices to prevent the animals from panicking. The task tested their coordination and patience, but they succeeded, proving to themselves that they could handle challenges as a team. Despite the labor, their bond grew stronger. They began to anticipate each other's movements, share small glances that conveyed understanding, and even laugh quietly when things went awry. One afternoon, Nayeli tripped over a patch of ice that had survived the sun's warmth, and Ethan caught her just in time. She looked up at him, cheeks flushed, and for a moment, the world outside the ranch seemed to disappear. "You always catch me," she said, her voice teasing yet soft. Ethan chuckled. "I've got to, haven't I? Can't let you fall, not when you've already survived so much." Their shared laughter was a brief reprieve from the weight of reality, but it also highlighted the trust that had grown between them. It was no longer just survival. It was connection, understanding, and reliance. Then came a day when the threat of the outside world became real. A small group of neighboring ranchers arrived at the edge of Ethan's property, their expressions stern. They demanded to speak with him, voicing concerns about Nayeli and insisting that she should leave. Ethan stood firm, his jaw tight. "She is not causing any trouble," he said calmly. "She is a guest on my property, and she will stay." One of the men stepped forward, his voice harsh. "We don't know her.
We can't trust her. She's an outsider, and some here think she might bring danger."
Ethan felt his patience stretch thin, but he held his ground. "I saved her from the forest when she was in danger. That is reason enough for her to be here. You have no right to make demands about my property or the people I protect." Nayeli stood beside him, her presence quiet but powerful. She did not speak, but her calm and steady stance spoke volumes. The neighboring men exchanged glances and, after a tense moment, rode away, muttering among themselves. Ethan and Nayeli watched them disappear into the distance, a mix of relief and lingering tension in the air. That evening, as the sky turned deep shades of purple and gold, Ethan and Nayeli sat by the fire in the cabin. The events of the day weighed heavily on them, but there was also a sense of triumph. They had faced the judgment of others together and had stood firm. "You're brave," Ethan said quietly, looking at her. "I don't think I've ever seen anyone handle danger like you do, not just in the forest, but out there with them." Nayeli shook her head softly. "I only did what I had to. You taught me that trust matters and courage matters. You saved me once, and now I stay because I trust you." Ethan felt a warmth in his chest, deeper than anything he had known for years. The bond between them was no longer just about survival. It was about trust, respect, and shared strength. As the days continued, they prepared for other potential challenges. They reinforced the fences, ensured the animals had sufficient food, and kept a careful watch over the property. Each task was undertaken with a sense of shared responsibility, strengthening their connection and proving to themselves that they could face adversity together. One afternoon, as they worked in the pasture, Naeli paused and looked toward the distant mountains. "I wonder what life would have been like if I had not gotten lost," she said softly. Ethan followed her gaze. "It doesn't matter," he said. "What matters is that you're here now, and we face life together. That's more important than what could have been." Naeli nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "I never imagined finding trust and friendship like this. Not out there in the forest, not anywhere. But here, with you, it feels right." Ethan felt a deep sense of connection as he listened to her. The trials they faced, the wolves, the storm, the judgment of others, had not only tested their courage, but had also solidified their bond. They had come to rely on each other, to trust each other, and to find comfort in each other's presence. As evening fell, they returned to the cabin, the fire already crackling in the hearth. They shared a quiet meal, their conversation light yet meaningful. The outside world, with its judgment and suspicion, seemed distant and insignificant compared to the trust and understanding they had built. That night, as they prepared to sleep, Ethan thought about how much had changed since Naeli had arrived. The ranch was no longer just a place of work and solitude. It had become a place of safety, connection, and shared purpose. Naeli's presence had brought warmth, courage, and companionship into his life, transforming his once lonely days into something richer and more meaningful. And as the wind whispered across the valley, Ethan realized that the challenges they faced, whether from nature or from people, were nothing compared to the strength they had gained together. Whatever the future held, they would face it side by side, with courage, trust, and the quiet understanding that had grown between them through trials and triumphs alike. Spring had fully arrived on the valley, and the ranch was alive with color. The grass had turned green, the trees had grown leaves, and the air was filled with the sweet songs of birds returning from their winter migration. For Ethan and Naeli, life on the ranch had become more than survival. It had become a rhythm of work, trust, and companionship. Each day was filled with purpose, and each evening brought the comfort of shared moments by the fire. The past few months had tested them in ways neither could have imagined. From the night of the wolf attack to the judgment of the neighboring ranchers, they had faced danger, fear, and uncertainty, but they had faced it together, and through it all, a deep bond had grown between them, a bond built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. One bright morning, Ethan and Naeli worked in the fields, checking fences and guiding the cattle to fresh pastures. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the faint scent of wild flowers. Ethan noticed Naeli moving gracefully among the animals, her hands steady and her eyes attentive. He watched her with admiration, remembering how she had been scared and injured the first day he had rescued her from the wolves. Now, she was strong, confident, and capable, a survivor in every sense of the word. "You've changed so much since you came here," Ethan said, breaking the comfortable silence. Naeli glanced at him, a small smile on her lips. "And you've changed too," she replied softly. "You are no longer alone. You've learned to share your world. And it feels better, doesn't it?" Ethan nodded.
It does. Life feels fuller with you here.
"I never knew I could feel this way after being alone for so long." They worked together in harmony, their movements synchronized, like a single unit. When a cow wandered too close to the edge of the pasture near the forest, they quickly guided it back. Their shared confidence and trust in each other made the task effortless, and they laughed quietly when a calf stubbornly refused to move. As the day wore on, Ethan suggested they take a break near the small stream that ran through the property. The water sparkled in the sunlight, and the sound of it flowing over rocks was soothing. They sat side by side, letting the quiet of the valley wash over them. I never thought I would find a place where I feel safe, Nayeli said, tossing a small pebble into the stream.
But here with you, it feels like home.
Ethan's heart tightened at her words. He had spent so many years in solitude, thinking he would never find someone to share his life with. And now she was here, not just as a guest or a survivor, but as someone who had become a part of his world. "You're my home now," he said quietly. "I don't know what I would do without you." Nayeli looked at him then, her dark eyes shining with emotion. "Ethan, I want to stay, not just for now, but for the future. I trust you, and I want to be with you." Ethan felt a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling he had not experienced in years. He reached out and took her hand gently. "Then we face the future together," he said. "Whatever comes, we will face it side by side." The days continued in this way, filled with hard work and quiet moments of companionship. They mended fences, fed the animals, and prepared for the coming summer. Each task was undertaken with patience and care, and each evening brought the comfort of the fire, shared meals, and stories of their past. They laughed, teased each other gently, and discovered small joys in the simplest tasks. But the past, and the world outside the ranch, was never far away. One afternoon, a messenger arrived from a nearby town carrying news that some of the neighboring ranchers were still uneasy about Nayeli's presence. They wanted to challenge Ethan's decision to protect her, questioning whether it was wise to allow an outsider on the property. Ethan listened quietly to the messenger, his jaw tight. He had expected some opposition, but the persistence of doubt and suspicion still frustrated him. He turned to Nayeli, who stood beside him, her posture calm and resolute. "They can talk all they want," Ethan said firmly. "This is our home. You are safe here, and I will not let anyone take that from you." Nayeli placed her hand on his arm, a small gesture of reassurance. "We can face them together," she said. "We have faced everything else together. We can handle this too." That evening they prepared for a possible confrontation. They reinforced the fences, gathered the animals close to the barn, and kept a watchful eye on the valley. The preparation was not about fear. It was about being ready, together, for whatever challenges might come. As night fell, they sat by the fire in the cabin, reflecting on all they had endured. Ethan looked at Nayeli, noting the strength and courage in her eyes. "I don't think I've ever met anyone like you," he said softly. "You've survived so much, and you've never lost your spirit. I admire you more than I can say." Nayeli smiled, a gentle warmth in her expression. "And I admire you, Ethan. You saved me when I had no one else. You gave me safety, and now you've given me hope. I trust you with my life." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. For a long moment, neither spoke, simply letting the fire crackle and the wind whisper outside. Then, with a quiet determination, Nayeli stood and moved closer to Ethan. She took his hands in hers, her gaze unwavering. "You're my man now," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "I choose to stay with you, not just to survive, but to live together." Ethan felt a surge of emotion he could not fully describe. His heart swelled with joy, relief, and love. He took her into his arms, holding her close, as if the world outside could not touch them. "And I choose you," he said, his voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside him. "You are a part of my life, my home, and my heart. I will protect you, always." From that moment, everything felt different. The ranch, the animals, the land, they were no longer just part of Ethan's life. They were part of their life together. Each day became an opportunity to build a shared future, to face challenges together, and to enjoy the simple joys of living in harmony with the land and each other. The coming weeks were filled with quiet happiness. They planted small gardens near the cabin, repaired the fences completely, and spent long afternoons walking through the fields, watching the animals graze. Their laughter echoed across the valley, a sound that had been absent for years in Ethan's solitary life. Neighbors who had once questioned Nayeli's presence began to notice the harmony and strength of their partnership. Some were still wary, but even they could not deny the bond and trust between Ethan and Nayeli. The valley seemed to accept them, just as they had accepted each other. One morning, as the sun rose and painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, Ethan and Nayeli stood on the porch of the cabin, watching the animals move through the pasture. Ethan placed a hand on Nayeli's shoulder, feeling the warmth of her presence. "Do you remember the day I found you in the forest?" he asked quietly. Nayeli nodded, her eyes soft. "I do. I was scared, cold, and alone. But then you came, and everything changed." Ethan smiled. "And everything changed again when you said those words," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You're my man now." That was the beginning of something I never thought I'd have, a life worth sharing. Nayeli leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "And you are my safe place," she said softly. "My home, my partner, my family." The seasons continued to change, and life on the ranch became a testament to trust, courage, and love. Ethan and Nayeli faced storms, repaired fences, tended animals, and nurtured their bond with patience and care. Each day brought challenges, but also the comfort of shared effort and shared joy. As the sun set over the valley one evening, casting long shadows over the fields and painting the mountains in hues of orange and purple, Ethan and Nayeli stood together, hand in hand, watching the world around them. The ranch had become more than just land and animals. It was a place of hope, love, and new beginnings.